Thanks so much for coming along to this session today. It's a real honor and a privilege for me and Tameem to be here today. So I'm Dominic Matthews. I'm Commercial Director at Ninja Theory. And I'm here with Tameem Antoniades, who is one of the Ninja Theory co-founders and Chief Creative Ninja at the studio. So today we're going to talk to you about Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which has been an incredible journey for us. So yeah, it's really great to be able to be here today to share that journey with you. Please remember to evaluate the session, particularly if you think it's good. If you don't think it's good, then don't bother. Cool. So we'll crack on with the presentation. So a bit about Ninja Theory first. We're a studio of about 100 people. We're based in Cambridge in the UK, and we've been making games for 18 years now. Over those years, we've created a number of titles, starting with Kung Fu Chaos back in 2003 for the original Xbox with Microsoft, Heavenly Sword for the PlayStation 3 in 2007 with Sony, Enslaved: Odyssey to the West in 2010 with Namco Bandai, DMC Devil May Cry, the reboot of that franchise in 2013, and then the definitive edition of that in 2015. And we worked on Disney Infinity 3.0 in 2015 as well, so we created the starter playset for that, as well as redesigning the entire combat system. And then the title in question last year, on August the 8th, we released Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which was our first independently funded and self-published title. The game was sold at $29.99. It was a PS4 and PC only title, a digital only title. And it really focused on Ninja Theory DNA, that DNA that we've created over the last 15 years, which is really creating immersive worlds and character-led stories and visceral, fluid combat gameplay. And combining all of those things to create an experience that really is what we see as pure Ninja Theory for Ninja Theory fans. And it tells the story of Senua, a Celtic warrior, and her vision quest to find the soul of her lover, and it's a journey into Psychosis, which Tameem will talk about a bit more later. But to kind of tell the Hellblade story from the beginning, we need to go back to 2014. We just released DMC Devil May Cry. And as a studio, we took a step back and took a look at the market at that time and the games space. We tried to pitch a very big AAA game to publishers. A game called Razor, which was never greenlit. It was a big games as a service title. And through that process, we really identified that the market had evolved into something where essentially sort of middle-tier, mid-sized developers like us making AAA games couldn't really survive. It was a difficult market for studios like us, and this was really down to the AAA arms race as we see it, which is the fixed price of games, AAA games at retail of $60 has meant that developers and games can't compete on price and instead have to compete on size and scale and scope. And this has meant that over the years, games have got bigger and bigger and bigger. Development teams have got bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, development costs have got bigger and bigger and bigger too. And what that has meant is that many genres that have thrived in the AAA space in years gone by simply can't survive anymore because they can't appeal to enough people to be justified. Games at this level now need to appeal to not just 2 million people or 3 million people, but now we're talking about 5, 6, 7, 8 million people. And through the process of us talking to publishers and about this title, this big title that we were looking at, and over the years, we kind of came up with this checklist of or tick boxes that titles now need to tick in order to survive in that space. Things like what's the season pass going to look like? Well, you need to have multiplayer. Every game needs to have multiplayer now. Well, does your protagonist appeal to enough people? Is it a Caucasian male with stubble and a shaved head? Because hey, that's what everyone's looking for these days. Yeah, just like me. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Tameem. And this kind of checklist culture in the AAA space has sadly meant that many genres have disappeared at the AAA end, and unfortunately, so too have the teams and the developers behind those types of games. And those developers have either disappeared altogether, they've had to move away from AAA development, or they've had to go and do something else completely different. And the list of studios that have disappeared is sort of between 2000 and sort of 2017 is absolutely phenomenal. And it's genres of games that I love playing when I was younger, like Jet Set Radio and Parappa the Rapper and Ico and Akami, all incredible games, high production values, incredibly creative, but just not mainstream enough to appeal to those millions and millions of people. So for us as a studio, we felt that pinch, and being in the situation where a team of 100 people, we make games that people love. We've got a fan base behind us. It's not huge, but it's a dedicated fan base that love what we do. But we were left with this choice of, do we either ramp up our team and our studio, triple our team size to make games that can appeal to those many millions of people, and risk sacrificing our core values and our creativity, I think, in the process? Or do we walk away from our, at that time, 15 years of development in the console business? And we didn't want to do either of those things. And that situation, I think, can be kind of summed up in this slide, which is players want creative games. Players want the kind of games that creative developers make, that we at Ninja Theory make. And frankly, that's what we want to make. We're in the business of making the games that we want to make for the people that want them. But there was a block on this. The AAA space wasn't allowing us to do that. So we wanted to find another way. We didn't want to go big, and we didn't want to go home. We wanted to find a third way. And we identified in the market that there's really these two extremes. On one side, you have independent games where creativity is incredible. New genres are being created all the time. But budgetary restrictions mean that quite often those small teams have to go down a route that isn't AAA production values. And then on the other side, in the blockbuster space, games are getting bigger, the production values are phenomenal, and just incredible what's being achieved there. But each of those games have to fit into very narrow genres, small number of genres that can survive at that very top end. So these two extremes, but really nothing that sits in the middle of those two. And this is the space that we called independent AAA. And independent AAA was about making AAA quality games, but that can be offered at lower flexible pricing, so that we can break away from that $60 retail model, make a game that we want to make, that is the scale and the scope that we want to make, and then price it appropriately. It's about having creative ownership, that independent freedom gives you, self-publishing so we can build a direct relationship with our players, and digital distribution is key to the model too. It allows us to achieve higher margins per unit that we sell. It allows us to have price control, and it allows us to deliver our product to fans across the world, wherever they may be, without the need to have a huge sales and publishing and distribution team within our small studio. So this started out as a concept for how we could break through that AAA block, make AAA production, games with AAA production values, but on with a small team and with a small budget. So fundamentally, how did this change things for us? Well, the biggest thing is that we were looking at a far smaller budget than we'd worked with ever before. So, this isn't indie budgets. This is something bigger than that, but it's certainly something far smaller than we would normally work with for a AAA game, and certainly far smaller than other AAA games are being made for in the current market. And the biggest cost in game development is obviously your team. So for us, we have a team of 100 people across Ninja Theory, and traditionally all of those people have worked on one product. But with Hellblade, we had a team of 20 people on the project across 3 years. So that meant that in many discipline areas, we had one person. And we had to be very innovative, and we had to be very creative in the way in which we could deliver the quality and the quantity that we needed to make the experience that we had the vision for in Hellblade. And key to this really was having the mindset and the attitude that we would never sacrifice on quality, and it wasn't a question of can we do it, it was a question of how do we do it. And a good example of that is in performance capture. So performance capture is a technology and a technique that we've worked with since Heavenly Sword. It was a technology that we pioneered on that project in video games. And it's something that we strongly believe is the way in which you can realize the truest character performance in a game. So on Hellblade, when we started the project, we knew that this was something that we wanted to not just utilize in Hellblade, but that we wanted to push further and try and push the boundaries of what we could achieve, but with our very small budget. So typically, we would fly out to the US or to New Zealand to a purpose-built motion capture facility to shoot all of the scenes for our games. But with Hellblade, that just wasn't possible within our budget. So the solution that we came up with, or certainly the idea initially, was, well, we've got our boardroom in the studio, which is our biggest meeting room. What about if we try and convert our boardroom into a motion capture studio? And initially, those conversations were quite difficult internally. It was like, well, we still need to use it as a meeting room. It's like, okay, you can still have a table in there. Over time, that table was moved out, but I think it's a good example of our attitude, which was, well, let's give it a go. Let's take a risk on this, and let's try and make it work. And if it doesn't, we'll move on to another solution. So we went into that boardroom. Balash, who's the cinematic lead on Hellblade, he drove to IKEA and bought wardrobe poles to mount our cameras on. We bought lighting from Amazon, so the lights you can see in this video are ceiling tile lights for offices from Amazon, and they cost $50 each, something in that kind of region. We bought soundproofing curtains, we bought gym mats for the floor, and we worked with Vicon to try and find a solution and a way to have a camera setup that would work within our budget. And that turned out to be the space in which we shot all of our cinematics for Hellblade. So every scene that you see in Hellblade was shot in our boardroom in this room. And an important point on this is that the quality of the data that we gained from this was in line, if not better, than anything we'd achieved before. And that's the important point, is that we weren't just, the important point is that what comes across on screen is not in any way compromised. If it was, we wouldn't have done this. It was trying to find a way that we could do it within our budget and keep that quality bar not just high, but higher than it's ever been before for us at Ninja Theory. So for comparison, obviously the costs that we had here were a fraction of what it cost for us to fly everyone out for a dedicated shoot. But we built our own in-house mocap space for what it would cost for around 3 or 4 days in an external studio. So it gave us quality, but it also gave us a huge amount of flexibility, and flexibility that we now wouldn't want to give up moving forward. So not only did we use this for all of our cinematics, but also it was a tool that our animators could use to go into that space at any time they wanted, jump in a mocap suit, and try stuff out. So throughout Hellblade, there's a lot of detailed animation that Senua has in particular situations, so running through fire where she's coughing, balancing across beams, trying to visualize her different states of being within the game. So hundreds and hundreds of animations that we have in there, and that was really only possible because just along the corridor in our boardroom was a facility that our animators could go and use, and they could experiment to try and find solutions to deliver that quality and detail that we needed to tell Senua's story. We also used that space for all of our VO recording. And again, this was something that was incredibly experimental. So what you can see here is us using a binaural microphone. So a binaural microphone is a microphone that records sound in the same way that a human head hears it. So it's a funny looking thing. It's a microphone with 2 rubber ears on the side that mimic the shadowing that your ears, particularly mine, do. So we could, this was a way for us to represent the voice hearing that, that as a player, you and Senua experiences throughout the journey. So rather than us being kind of cramped up in a recording studio, we could use that entire space, put our binaural microphone in the middle, and have physical performers, theatre performers, perform around that microphone to bring some real physicality to that audio. So again, cost saving, we could do everything in-house, we could bring our actors in, but it allowed us to be more experimental too. Jeff, who is our character artist on the project, had the task of creating all of our enemies. So an approach that he took was to use a handheld scanner to capture both textures and geometry, base level textures and geometry for which he can build on top of. So we use this for anatomy, but we also use this for things like textiles. And this was just a good way of deriving realism, high level of realism, but it didn't mean that Jeff had to go in there and by hand create all of this stuff from scratch. He had a good base to work from. So again, using technology, off-the-shelf technology in this case, in a clever way to achieve quality and quantity. And really the same with environment. So Dan Atwell, our lead environment artist on the project, given the responsibility of delivering all of the Hellblade world. And his approach was to use a kit part-based approach to the environment. So what you can see in this shot here is, on the left is all of the assets that are used to create this environment in the screenshot. So his focus was to create a small number of very high quality assets and focus his time on that, and then use them in clever ways to create the world. So just using these trees and these rocks in different ways, sinking them into the ground, painting over them with moss, these types of things, he could create a very high quality, varied environment without the need to create a huge amount of bespoke content. And this was one that was quite late on in the project. So given what we were doing with characters in the project, we have a focus on characters, but we always knew that Senua was the real focus. We wanted to make her the most realistic, real-time character that anyone had ever seen. But Tameem always held on to this idea that maybe we could visualize the characters in another way. And Tameem's idea was to use live action, which of course given the track record of live action in games, the entire team was incredibly on board with from day one. Raised a few eyebrows, but again, it was the attitude of, let's give it a go, and if it's going to fail, let's fail quick and move on to an alternative solution. So when we were shooting some of the VO, we had a friend who was a costume designer, create costumes for the actors. We shot them on green screen, and we got them into the game. Got those shots into the game as quickly as possible to try and see if we could make it work, and it worked. It worked really well. First time we showed this to anyone was actually when Game Informer came over to visit the studio, and when we just got into the game, and we just got the sort of final treatment in there, and we showed them one of these scenes without telling them that it was live action. We all kind of sat there and thought, are they going to notice? And they didn't. So we thought that was a job well done. So, again, an example of, let's challenge the way things have always been done. Yes, live action hasn't traditionally worked in games, but let's see if we can make it work for Hellblade, and we did. So there's some examples of really how we delivered the high quality in the game with creativity and with innovation, but also key to I think what we've achieved on Hellblade was not just the development within the budget, but also marketing and engaging people in the game within budget as well. And our approach was to try and engage players at a deeper level than just showing them a trailer, and that was to announce the game early, very early. Look how young I look there. Full of hope. So we announced the game really at the very beginning of the project, 3 years before launch, and we told the story, warts and all, in a very open and honest way through 30 development diaries throughout the project. And we told the story of the ups and the downs and everything that we were trying in the game. And through that process, we not only created a fan base behind Hellblade, but we created evangelists and people that wanted to tell people about the game, tell people about our journey. And how that really kind of tangibly manifested was that when we announced our pre-order and went into pre-order, we got pre-order numbers way beyond our expectations, and we were able to use that revenue from pre-order to drive a larger marketing campaign at launch. So it was by kind of mobilizing that community, bringing them on board early, and treating them with respect and giving them an insight into what our journey was, that they repaid us with their faith, not just by pre-ordering the game and helping us with our marketing budget, but really evangelizing the game to their own communities too. So to sum up my section, keys to independent AAA: flexible, lower pricing, breaking away from that $60 retail model to offer a game that is smaller in scope, is no less high quality, but can be offered at a value price. Keeping your budget low, predominantly through team size, but through innovation to keep that break-even low, so that you can make games for smaller niche audiences. You don't have to make a game that appeals to 5+ million people, and the creative sacrifices that come with that. Building community, having a direct relationship with your fans, and being honest, being open with them, giving them the opportunity to be part of your journey, making them believe in what you believe, not just selling them a game. And finally, having a creative focus. And much of the structure of independent AAA is about allowing the creative team to have that focus and that freedom to tell the story that they want to. And I'll hand over to Tameem to talk about that story and that journey that we decided to tell in Hellblade.
Cool. Thanks, Dom. So, I always get asked what gave you the idea to do Hellblade. And when I think of truly original fantasy, I think of Lord of the Rings, 1984, Blade Runner, Night of the Living Dead. Obviously, fantasy goes way further back, Gilgamesh and Beowulf, what have you. But I'd say most popular fantasy today is a derivation of those popular movies or books. And I didn't want to do that because they also come with their own set of rules and baggage. And expectations that have been built up over time. So I really did want to make something original, a game that wasn't derived from those well-trodden tropes, and to find something that felt a bit more grounded. And I thought fantasy comes from the mind, so why not go to the source? And a very frightening and extreme example of what the mind is capable of creating can be found in psychotic mental illness. And at the time, it sounded dangerous, perhaps even reckless, to kind of broach that subject. But I do truly believe that the power of fantasy comes from its ability to help further understanding through allegory. A fantasy is able to break down prejudices and assumptions, because you have to open your mind to these worlds in order to accept and enjoy them. So the idea was born that Hellblade would be a classic hero's journey, but one where the fantasy world is a construct of Senua's mind. So that's sort of where it began. Yeah. So just to cover what Psychosis is, Psychosis is a set of are the symptoms, and it can be caused by various causes: smoking pot, schizophrenia. There's a multitude of causes, but it's about losing contact with reality, and it often manifests itself with visions and voices and strange beliefs and delusions. Oh, excuse me. So Senua can be described as having a severe psychotic mental illness, and it is a subject that is taboo for sure. And where it does feature, it's usually in the form of like the serial killer, or the plot twist at the end where nothing was real, it was all a dream. Aha, I find that both those aspects quite frustrating. So why is it not represented directly and more honestly in fiction? I think, for one, we don't actually know a lot about it from a scientific point of view. It's compared to physical illnesses and conditions, we're way behind when it comes to mental conditions. I mean, we're not taught about, if you think about it, we're not taught about the mind like in school, like we are taught about biology. So we all grow up ignorant about what the mind is, how it functions. And I also think that a lot of creators think that this is this is dangerous territory. It's a Pandora's box that, once opened, will open you up to savage critical attacks that'll expose your ignorance. And this is something that I very much feared at the start of the project. I have no qualms with admitting that I was ignorant on the subject. And if you were around for DMC, you'd know that savage critical attacks is something we've sort of had to deal with before. So we weren't that afraid of dealing that if it would come. But creatively, what excited me was it was a path least trodden. I mean, I think that's what I was looking for, just something different, something new, a chance to show you what it might be like to experience the world through the mind of someone who experiences psychosis. It felt interesting, intellectually exciting, creatively, but I had to learn, and the whole team had to learn. So how did we learn? Dom went to Google and found Paul Fletcher, Professor of Health Neuroscience and Psychiatrist at the University of Cambridge, and sent him an email. He also got in touch with Wellcome Trust, which is a massive charity organization that deals with health. And Wellcome often provides grants for like arts projects and films. So we were hoping that, with their assistance, they could open doors for us. So Paul and representatives of Wellcome met us, grilled us. We had to do a good amount of presentations to them. And once they came on board fully for the full 3 years of development. They involved other clinicians and experts, Professor Charles Fernyhough, an expert in voice hearing, lots of people with lived experience of psychosis, from Recovery College East in Cambridge and the Voice Collective, various others, researchers and advisors. So they didn't just open doors, they really did blow the doors off. And I really would like to share what the insights that we've had on this, because I think it's important, not just from a game development point of view. I think it's just a fascinating subject. So I'm sorry if it's slightly off the game developer's track. But this key insight that I learned, which is that we only really see the shadows of reality, is what underpins the whole of the creative effort in Hellblade. We like to think that we are objective, seeing the world as it is, but we are so far removed from objective reality that the whole concept is almost meaningless. And of course, this is not a particularly new insight, as attested by Plato's allegory of the cave. And for those who are not familiar, the idea is that a bunch of people are in a cave, and they're set up such that they can only see the projected shadows of people in the real world. And so they form their own strange interpretation of how this world functions until one of them breaks free and then sees the real world and then rushes back and tells them what it actually is like. And of course, they think he's insane. It doesn't make sense to any of them. And so this insight really does apply to us. I mean, we only see shadows. I mean, if you consider vision, light is a narrow spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's actually a 10 trillionth of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's how we define color and objects and concepts like race. Like we create our own reality just from that sliver of what we see that's out there in the universe. And we don't even experience the world in real time. So from the time you click your fingers to understanding what you've just done or what you've just seen can take half a second. And our visual processing and our auditory processing happens at different speeds, so it's not in sync. So somehow our brain just manages to amass all this noisy, unreliable information and create a reality for us so that we can function. So we feel like we are in a world that is fully 3D present with us at the center, and we call this objective reality. And our mind is able to construct this fallacy of objectivity, a simulation of the world, no less, based on everything we have experienced since birth. So if you have wondered, whether you are living in a simulation, I think one answer has to be yes. We are living in a simulation of our own mind's making. And so what does this mean? It means that we don't passively perceive a world. We don't just receive a world and our eyes see it. We actually hallucinate the world. In our every second of every day, we are actually hallucinating a simulation of a world that our brain creates for us. Just think of moments when you were fearful and at night, and maybe you could see shapes and shadows, or when you're really angry and you're red with rage, how you interpret what people say, or the kind of gray lethargic world of grief. I mean, these are all... The world looks different depending on on your state of mind. So in this context, it becomes easier to conceive of scenarios where our mind, with its endless adaptive feedback loops, can divert from the standard we term normality. And what we see in a psychotic mind is often a deconstruction, a separation of the fundamental relationships between sight, sound, senses, concepts, belief, even flow of time. And once we understood it and accepted that we do not see through our eyes, but create worlds through our mind's eye, we had a model of reality that we could then start to deconstruct. And combined with the real lived experiences of people with psychosis, we had a powerful coming together of science, art, and human experience. So this was the eureka moment for me, the mind's eye. But what does this mean practically? It means we are not seeing this game through the lens of a cameraman. It means we're not hearing the music from the composer or seeing the editor's handiwork in the cutscenes. Everything has to feel subjective, as it would feel, look, and sound to Senua through her mind's eye.
We like to think that we experience the world almost like a high-definition high-definition photograph as it really is, but actually a lot of the time what we're doing is using what we already know to shape and govern what we perceive. You know, if we recognise that principle of how the brain functions, it may be that we can begin to understand what happens in the context of psychosis, because psychosis can't really easily be understood as just some malfunction of the mind. It's actually a very creative process where somebody constructs a world.
So that's Professor Paul Fletcher, who I consider a mentor and guru throughout the course of this development. So that's why his name comes up first in the credits, because he was that fundamental to our understanding of what, how the mind works, the neuroscience behind it, the experiences behind it, and he helped shape the development of the project in a deep and fundamental way. So to break it down, visual perception. We did meet with Recovery College East to speak to people with lived experience of psychosis regularly throughout the project, and they became our mental health advisors, combined with the knowledge of psychiatric conditions that Paul had come across. We did a rapid prototyping phase in the project where we took their experiences, their described experiences, and we mocked it up in Unreal. So this is sort of a little video where we have quotes from people, and then we've iterated it in Unreal to try and represent those ideas. And we invited them back in to have a look at what we've done, and then they would tell us, oh, that feels a bit off, or that doesn't feel right. And obviously, everyone's experience is unique, but there did seem to be enough of a common thread amongst them that we could really refine the visual perceptual representations in the game. So yeah, it's the classic iterative process we all use in games, but instead of applying it to mechanics, we were applying it to people's lived experience. So the camera viewpoint. I think one thing that struck me is that our mind's eye doesn't always see in the first person. If you think about memories, sometimes you see yourself in the third person, and it's quite easy to sit there where you are and project yourself so that you're looking at the back of your head. And then when you remember that memory, you remember looking at the back of your head. It's quite a strange concept. And I thought the third-person camera view actually could be used to give you a feeling of disassociation, which for some people is a real thing, where they just don't feel like they live inside their own skin. They feel like strangers in their own skin. So this would mean letting go of standard film theory and camera cuts. The game would be just one continuous, uncomfortable shot, whether it's cutscene or gameplay. It would also mean that there would be no health bars, no hit points, no inventory, no tutorials, nothing that would break you out of the idea that you're fully immersed in this world as an observer, as part of Senua's psyche, and a participant. You are her mind's eye, the watchful mind's eye. It also helped with the budget, because now we only needed one camera person, and the mocap space could track one person a lot better than 3 camera people, which is what we would normally use. So the flashbacks were also interesting. One of our mental health advisors described vividly how she experiences them. To her, she would see the flashback appear around her, forming from something that might start off unclear, and then she would get drawn in and start to relive that experience. So it's not like films where you get lots of fast cuts. It was more like you're just sucked into a new reality. And I could relate to that somewhat. So if you think of times where you're dreaming, and then your dream just transitions from one moment to another seamlessly, and you're just drawn in, you're not aware of how it happens. It just does happen. So the flashbacks that appear in the game all appear in all the story scenes, in fact. The main story scenes appear as flashbacks. They appear non-linearly. They're largely in reverse chronological order. And my fear was that this would be terribly confusing. But when you think about memories, you don't think about memories in a linear chronological order. You think about the moments that define your life. That's what matters, the impact those moments, those scenes in your life experience have on you. So that's how they appear in the game. And I really was not sure if people would get the story, whether it would just be an incomprehensible, mess by the end of it. But I think it actually did come across as quite natural to a lot of people. They didn't need to see the links between the time period between these events. They just got an insight into the moments that shaped Senua's life. And this is another example of how the game was more reflective of our mind's eye than reflective of film narrative constructs. And the voices are the most immediate experience that hits you. I didn't have any clue what people who hear voices hear. Chances are you know people that do hear voices. It's apparently 1 in 10 of us experience it at some point in our lives. Welcome introduced us to Professor Paul, getting all my professors wrong, Professor Charles Fernyhough, who's a leading expert in voice hearing. And he in turn put us in touch with a group of people called the Voice Collective. And we heard firsthand from these people, what these voices are like. And it was quite a revelation. It was to have the opportunity to speak to, in particular, a couple of young voice hearers at our studio. The term mentally ill just never came across our minds when talking to them. It clearly did not apply to them. And I really felt their frustration because they don't consider themselves mentally ill. They hear voices, and they endure quite a lot of frustration and stigma on a daily basis because of this fact. And this is why a lot of these mental health advisors were keen to work with us on this game. They wanted to show what it's like for them, or at least give a taste of what it's like for them. Anyway, when it comes to the voices, they said that they were all around them in 3D. Sometimes they're in very specific positions. Sometimes they speak in fragments. Sometimes they're distorted. Sometimes they're different languages. Sometimes they're fully fleshed characters that they've grown up with from childhood, that they might consider long trusted friends or foes. And the binaural microphone is the best way to represent 3D spatial audio in that manner. So that's what we use to try and iterate on the voices with our physical theater actors to try and get closer and closer and closer to what their experience was like. Now, this is another interesting decision we made, because the idea that you would make a game that's designed for headphones, wouldn't wash as a AAA game. But our goal was to create Senua's mind's eye, create her experience, and that's why we asked players to put on a set of headphones when they played the game at the start of the game, and it worked. Like people, the first thing, one of the main things that people say when they recommend our game is, you have to play it with headphones. It's such a fundamental part of the experience. So I like that. It's given me a lot of trust in our audience. The idea that people really do want to experience new things, and we don't have to do fit the lowest common denominator. We can create an experience that people come to. That was great. Right, so the implications of unreliable reality go far, far deeper than visual and auditory. I mean, our neurons don't make a distinction between what we see, hear, touch, feel, think, and believe. So those fun optical illusions and things that we see online, the mental gymnastics that underpin them, applies to pretty much everything that occurs within our brain. It applies to our belief systems, to our thoughts, to the way we see people, the way we see the world. And it points to the fundamental way we think and believe in things, no matter how irrational they may be. I mean, I was thinking, we were having that, what was it? There was that big hog last night, Yeah. Yeah, and a hog roast, right? And if you think about it, why are we outraged when someone eats a dog and not when we eat an equally sentient animal like a pig? Now, I'm not a vegetarian, but I recognize it as an irrational belief system or way of being. Same could be applied to race, religion, gender. We just categorize and believe strange, delusional things. And we all grow up with these ingrained belief systems and delusions that we can't escape without extraordinary effort. Often, but not always, a change in belief system requires trauma. And what we see in the psychotic mind are the very extreme cases of the mechanism that we all have in action. So for Senua, this manifests in several ways. The Norse legends that are told to her by Druth are what shapes her reality. She is on a real quest. This isn't all a dream. She is on a real quest fighting Viking warriors. But like Don Quixote, what she sees is and believes are interpreted by what she knows and what her life experiences are. And the dark rot mechanism in the game that we shared with the player somewhat controversially with our permadeath message, that's part of the belief systems, the delusional belief systems that we wanted to instill in the player. But contrary to what people may think, the message is not a lie. It's not a lie. It's our interpretation of it, based on our prior belief systems, that makes it what it is. So, you can read about psychosis, the symptoms, the theory, but in a video game, we could do so much more. We give you a taste of the lived experience. And this scene is one of my favorite ones. It sort of encapsulates all these different aspects, going into a flashback, seeing visions, the voices coming out of it. One of our mental health advisors told us that the thing that hurts the most for her was being in a beautiful state of mind, in a calm, serene, beautiful state of mind, because visions can be positive. And then it's just being pulled like a rug under your feet into something horrific. When you're not prepared for what's coming, that's when it hurts the most. And I think this is a scene that encapsulates that. So we'll have some volume for this. Oh. Here we go. Let me try that again. Hang on. There we go.
What's your name?
Senua.
I haven't seen you before.
I don't leave home much.
Oh, Zeno's daughter.
I have to go.
Wait. Who taught you to fight like that?
No one.
No one?
Well, I watched you, and...
You learned all of that from watching me? You should become a warrior, you know.
Me?
I'm Dilly. I'm here for the warrior trials. Just come and watch. Bring your swords.
You can't put it into words. That moment when you look into the eyes of the one who is supposed to reassure you, make you feel safe. It only takes an instant. Fear swallows you before you have a chance to make sense of it. And darkness becomes a part of who you are. But her world changed the day the Northmen took him from her. Senua knows that there's no going back to how things were. That there's nothing to go back to at all. Stay still, stay quiet, hide.
Their gods can see into your mind. They will use this power to destroy you.
They won't stop me. I can still feel him.
Whatever's left of him, they will never let him go.
I'm not gonna let him rot here.
You're the one rotting here.
Leave me alone.
You will die here.
No.
And all your suffering will have been for nothing.
So she believes that she can save her lover's soul despite the fact that she's carrying his head, dead, corpse head, on her hip. So it sort of incorporates all of those kind of belief systems, visions, auditory hallucinations, flashbacks. And it's it's moving in a way that just reading about this in the DSM or whatever just doesn't bring across. And I think that's what games have the power to do. So I'll leave you with this thought. It's clear to me now that the notion of objective reality is just an impossibility, but that doesn't mean that we have to live, just accept an irrational state of mind. We can all see the shadows of Plato's cave if we look for them. We can find it in science, in evidence, in lived experience. So without losing sight of these, we can strive for high levels of understanding. We can improve our personal simulation of our world and our place in it. And with games, we have a tangible tool with which we can share our simulation with other people. This game has now attracted the attention of clinicians, policymakers, and we've presented it to the Houses of Parliament, to MPs. And I think there's an interest in it because we've made the invisible visible, and ideas are starting to form about how gaming technology could be used to help understand and treat conditions like these in the future. So my pitch to you as artists, creators, is this. Don't sacrifice evidence on the altar of entertainment. Don't assume that your audience is too dumb to relate to reality. If you're a confident artist or storyteller, the pursuit of truth won't hinder you. It will support you and enhance your visions in ways that will set you apart from cliché and derivative works. So that's the lesson that I have learned making Hellblade. And I'll pass you back to Dom. Thank you.
So Hellblade started out as an experiment to see if we could break through that AAA blockbuster model, create a game that we want to create in our vision for fans that love them. And we're really happy to be able to say that experiment turned into a great success for us. Critically, the reviews we received for the game were phenomenal. We're extremely happy to have picked up a number of different awards. Last week we heard that we've received 9 BAFTA nominations, which is incredible. And the game's been a commercial success as well. We kept our budget low enough that our break-even at $30 was under 500,000 units. And we went through that several months ahead of what we thought we would. And we're well into profit on the game now. Which is incredible. And when we started this project, we had the notion that if we could make this work, then not only could we as Ninja Theory continue to make independent AAA games, but that it would be an example for other developers that find themselves in a similar situation to us too, that can use it as ammunition when they're having those conversations with publishers, with funders, or internally to say, look, if Ninja Theory can make it work with their vision, with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, then maybe we can make it work too. So critically successful, commercially successful, which are all things that we hope for. But I think one of the most valuable things from this project for us, and one of the most unexpected things, was the overwhelming response to the themes that we presented in the game. We've received hundreds of messages from players that have found that the game and Senua's journey has had an impact on them and on their lives and the lives of their family. People have found that it's given them a language in which they can talk about their own difficulties. It's given them a platform and confidence to talk about their own mental health difficulties for the first time. And people have shown it to their friends and family and said, what Senua has gone through in this story is similar to what I've been through. And it's helped people to understand, which, for us, us personally, I think being able to work on this project and have that kind of reaction has been, something I never thought I'd have in my career. And I think that is due to the independent AAA model. To have that creative vision, to take creative risks and have a creative focus, we could deliver something that has had a genuine impact. Not only that, but through the success of Hellblade, we had the opportunity to give something back to that mental health community. And on Mental Health Awareness Day last October the 10th, we were in a position to donate all of the proceeds that we at Ninja Theory received from the sale of the game on that day. And we were able to give a cheque for just over £60,000 to Rethink Mental Illness, a charity that focuses on helping people who are diagnosed with mental health issues. So that sums up the presentation for today. You can follow us on the socials. You can email me, and please remember to evaluate the session. Thank you.
We've got 5 minutes for questions. Questions?
Yeah, I think we've got time for a question or two. If anyone has questions, yeah. Just rock up to the mic and. Do you want to fire away?
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Lewis. Very inspirational. Thanks for the talk. It's very inspirational for all of the dev diary. My question is. How was the work-life balance of the 20 people who were involved in Hellblade?
I mean, we can probably both answer this, but I think in Ninja Theory we're dedicated to not scheduling in crunch. It's counterproductive. So I think the nature of the project, it was a big part of our lives. But that didn't mean that we were working 24/7, we were working every weekend. That wasn't the case. Yes, we put in extra time and hard work at the end of the project to realize it, but you can't schedule in crunch. This model wouldn't work on that basis.
And one way we try and avoid it is to, we give time off in lieu. So when people have to work to a deadline, we have to give the time off in lieu. So that controls how much we ask of them.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, let's do maybe one.
So recalling back to one of my favorite lines from the game where she's on the bridge and the narrator mentions, if you think that Senua's reality is warped and you have to admit there's a chance yours is too. And the whole game taps into this fantastic concept within the player of their empathy, which is one of the, I think, core learning capabilities of the brain. What kind of ways, or have you guys ever thought about using this game as even like an academic educational as an independent developer? You guys don't really have a publisher to kind of block that.
Yeah, so the question is, have we thought about using it in an academic or research basis? Professor Paul and his research team uses the game to teach his students. We've had various psychiatrists and clinicians get in touch with us, and they use the game to show to people. But really what the game does is help people see, experience something. I think there's another step beyond that, which is if we can simulate these realities, we can probably phenotype people's experiences, and then see if treatments may or may not have a success. So that's something I would dearly like either ourselves or other researchers to explore.
Thank you so much.
And we probably have time for just one more. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah.
I don't know if this is an actual thing with the types of psychoses that you were dealing with in the game. So I apologize if this question doesn't make that much sense. But in your research in trying to basically replicate these experiences that are, in some cases, I'm sure, traumatic, were you ever afraid that you would cause harm to people that were engaged in the game, and how did you mitigate that?
Yeah. So were we afraid that we would cause harm by doing this? Well, I mean, I was, yes, but until I understood that the issues that people have, are incredibly pervasive, repetitive issues that dog them for years and years and years, and I don't think one piece of entertainment is going to be the tipping point. But I would also argue that having an honest representation is better than having the myriad of dishonest representations that are out there. So most people, we put a warning sign up, we put a help page up for people. So we've tried to we try to show the truth, but also to kind of just caution people and give them somewhere to go.
Thanks. It was a fantastic talk.
All right, I'm sorry, guys. I think we're out of time there. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you.